Have you ever entered a room and sensed how certain people instantly change their energy when you walk in? Have you noticed how some individuals grow uneasy when you speak honestly, as though your presence challenges something at the core of who they are? What if I told you that your mind holds a level of power so deep, so psychologically refined, that it genuinely unsettles those who have built their identity on manipulation and control? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what occurs when your authentic self becomes a clear threat to people who survive within carefully maintained illusions? What happens when your psychological resilience becomes so visible, so steady, that narcissists, those skilled manipulators who depend on emotional weakness, begin to fear your presence? Stay with me as we move through this focused psychological analysis, because by the end of this discussion, you will recognize the 8 clear signs that your mind has developed a strength so solid, so mentally advanced, that it forces narcissists to retreat. And I assure you, sign number 6 will completely transform the way you view your own mental power and explain why certain individuals seem to lose their composure around you. But before we examine these powerful insights in depth, let's first understand what is truly happening beneath the surface. I need you to understand something that most people rarely recognize about the true nature of psychological strength and why it creates such fear in those who rely on manipulation and false superiority. According to Carl Jung, the human psyche is far more layered and powerful than most people ever dare to imagine. Through decades of clinical observation and deep personal analysis, Jung identified that certain individuals develop what he called psychological differentiation, a condition of mental clarity, emotional balance, and strong self-awareness that becomes extremely resistant to manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional exploitation. What Jung found most compelling about these psychologically developed individuals is this: they don't resist manipulation through constant effort alone. They expose it simply by being authentic. Their presence, their natural way of moving through the world, quietly reveals the artificial and empty nature of narcissistic behavior, and this creates what Jung described as narcissistic terror, a deep, instinctive fear that surfaces when a false self encounters genuine authenticity. Carl Jung stated, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what happens when you have done the inner work so thoroughly that attempts to provoke, control, or manipulate you no longer land? They strike your psychological resilience and fall away like arrows hitting a fortress wall." Before we examine these 8 significant signs, it's important to understand something essential about what you're about to hear. If you're drawn to this topic, if something encouraged you to explore it, there is a strong possibility that you already carry several of these qualities. Your intuition likely guided you here because a part of you recognizes these patterns in your own life. However, don't celebrate too quickly. Having a mind strong enough to unsettle narcissists comes with its own difficulties, responsibilities, and social consequences. It is not always easy to be the person who sees through illusions while others prefer the comfort of deception. Sign 1. You refuse to accept surface-level explanations and consistently look beyond psychological facades. Through his extensive work with patients and his own self-exploration, Carl Jung observed that most people accept simple explanations because going deeper requires courage they are unwilling to use. But you operate differently. Your mind naturally questions surface-level answers, much like an advanced immune system rejecting an infection. When someone offers a convenient excuse for their behavior, your immediate thought is, what is truly happening beneath this explanation? When a person presents a flawless image or shares a story that feels overly polished and perfectly arranged, you instinctively search for inconsistencies, subtle gaps, and the deeper motivations driving their behavior. This is not cynicism, nor is it paranoia. It is what Jung described as penetrating psychological insight. Your awareness has developed the capacity to look beyond masks, social roles, and carefully built identities to perceive the authentic psychological reality underneath. According to Carl Jung, The persona is a complex system of relationships between individual consciousness and society, a kind of mask designed both to create a specific impression on others and to conceal the individual's true nature. And here is what makes your psychological strength so unsettling to narcissists. You see directly through the persona to the insecure and fearful individual beneath it. You are not persuaded by exaggerated achievements, detailed justifications, or carefully constructed images of superiority and confidence. Narcissists strongly dislike this quality because their entire sense of self depends on others accepting the image they have carefully created without question. They rely on people believing their narratives, their justifications, and their detailed explanations for behavior that may seem questionable. They need an audience willing to take their performance at face value, but your awareness cuts through that psychological performance with clarity and precision. You see the control hidden beneath their charm. You notice the insecurity beneath their confidence. You detect the fear behind their hostility. Carl Jung observed that psychologically resilient individuals possess what he described as unconscious detection, the capacity to recognize psychological truths that others overlook because they trust their intuitive understanding of human nature rather than socially convenient explanations. When you refuse to accept shallow answers, you remove the narcissist's main strategy: deception. You force them to face the fact that their manipulative tactics are ineffective with you. This realization can create such deep discomfort that many narcissists choose to distance themselves rather than risk being fully understood. Here is where the dynamic becomes even more significant, something many people fail to recognize. Your refusal to accept oversimplified explanations does more than frustrate narcissists. It activates their deepest existential fear, being genuinely known for who they are beneath layers of psychological defense. Sign 2. You maintain steady emotional independence. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the interaction of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are changed. Notice the key condition: if there is a reaction. Some individuals become so psychologically secure and emotionally grounded that manipulation attempts simply do not provoke a response. This reflects the inner stability you have developed through self-awareness and personal growth. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for establishing boundaries, you do not internalize that pressure. When a person creates conflict in an effort to control your behavior, you do not absorb their instability. When someone presents their emotional turmoil as your responsibility, you remain centered and composed. Emotional independence is not detachment or a lack of compassion. It reflects psychological maturity. You have learned to separate authentic emotions that merit empathy from exaggerated displays intended to influence your decisions. As Carl Jung stated, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Yet you have reached a level of self-awareness where manipulative tactics no longer disturb you, they simply have no impact. Narcissists find this stability deeply confusing because their methods rely on provoking emotional reactions. Their approach depends on making you feel guilty when they are displeased, anxious when they show anger, or responsible when they claim harm from your reasonable actions. Your emotional self-reliance removes the effectiveness of these strategies entirely. It's as if they're speaking a language you no longer understand, using tools that no longer work on your evolved psychological system. Jung described this state as psychological non-absorption, the ability to observe other people's emotional states without taking them into your own inner world. You no longer carry other people's emotional turmoil because your identity has become well-defined, steady, and psychologically mature. What truly unsettles narcissists about your emotional independence is this: it reflects back to them their own emotional immaturity and instability. When they encounter someone who doesn't need emotional drama to feel alive, who doesn't rely on constant stimulation to stay engaged with life, it exposes their emotional dependency and dysfunction. Your calm, grounded presence becomes a mirror, revealing what they lack: true emotional regulation, real inner peace, and the capacity to live without creating chaos for control or entertainment. Sign 3. You trust your own perceptions with unshakable confidence. Carl Jung uncovered a powerful truth about psychological strength when he said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." This awakening, this deep self-knowledge, creates a firm trust in your own perceptions. And that trust is deeply threatening to those who depend on distorting reality to stay in control. When someone attempts to gaslight you, trying to make you question your memory, your senses, your understanding of events, your mind remains steady. You know what you saw. You know what you heard. You know what you experienced. No manipulation, no confident denial, no revision of events can force you to doubt your own reality. To a narcissist, this steady self-trust feels like psychological warfare. Gaslighting is often their most powerful strategy, their ultimate method of control. It relies on making others doubt their own perceptions so their version of events can replace the truth. But your mind has become like a fortress, resistant to these tactics. You've developed what Jung referred to as phenomenological certainty, deep confidence in your lived experience. Jung also stated that the most frightening thing is to fully accept oneself. For narcissists, however, what is most frightening is meeting someone who has already done so, someone who trusts themselves completely, someone whose self-awareness is so solid that outside attempts to destabilize it simply fail. What makes this dynamic even more compelling is that your self-trust doesn't just protect you, it reflects their inner insecurity back to them. They see in you what they don't possess: authentic self-trust, genuine self-understanding, and the psychological stability that comes from deep self-awareness. Jung observed that individuals who trust their perceptions have typically done significant inner work. They have examined their patterns, acknowledged their blind spots, and recognized their capacity for self-deception. This process creates balanced confidence. You trust your perceptions not out of arrogance or refusal to consider other perspectives, but because you understand yourself. When narcissists encounter this grounded self-trust, they realize they are facing someone who has reached a level of psychological development they themselves have not attained. This realization produces what Jung described as developmental terror, the fear that arises when someone recognizes how far behind they are in their own growth. Sign 4. You don't need external validation to feel worthy or complete. According to Carl Jung, the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Yet many people spend their lives chasing approval, validation, and recognition from others just to feel worthy or valuable. You do not. You've cultivated what Jung called inner validation, the psychological ability to recognize your worth independently of others' opinions, judgments, or praise. This internal foundation is deeply unsettling to narcissists because their entire psychological structure depends on external validation. They rely on admiration, attention, praise, and constant recognition to maintain an inflated self-image. Without it, their sense of identity weakens. Your independence from that system challenges everything their stability depends on. They assume everyone functions this way because it's the only mode of existence they understand. So when they come across someone who genuinely does not require their approval, who does not seek validation, and who does not compete for their attention, it completely disrupts their understanding of how human psychology operates. It's like realizing that some people can breathe underwater when you believed everyone needed air to survive. But there is a deeper psychological process at work here. Narcissists rely on validation as a tool for control. They offer and withdraw approval deliberately to influence other people's behavior. Over time, they create a dependency on validation within their relationships, allowing them to control others by managing access to recognition and approval. When you no longer need their validation, you effectively eliminate their main source of power over you. It's like being immune to a substance that everyone else depends on. You cannot be controlled through something you do not need. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Your inner sense of validation represents this awakening. You have turned inward and discovered your own worth, your own value, and a sense of wholeness that does not rely on external praise. Jung found that psychologically mature individuals develop what he called self-authorization, the ability to affirm their own experiences, decisions, and worth without needing outside confirmation. This does not mean you ignore sincere compliments or helpful feedback. It means you do not depend on them to understand who you are or to feel secure about yourself. This self-authorization is deeply unsettling to narcissists because it reflects a level of psychological freedom they cannot grasp. They see someone who has escaped the validation prison they themselves remain trapped in, and this triggers both envy and fear. Envy for what you have achieved, and fear of what your independence means for their ability to manipulate and control. We are now approaching the halfway point of these insights, but the most powerful signs are still to come. Sign number 6 will reveal something about your psychological strength that you may not yet fully recognize, something that explains why certain individuals seem to have physical reactions to your presence. Sign 5. You identify manipulation tactics immediately and respond from a position of strength. Jung said, "Everything unconscious dissolves when you bring the light of consciousness to it." Your mind has developed a strong awareness that exposes manipulation the moment it appears in the interaction. No matter how subtle or refined the attempt, when someone uses guilt to influence your actions, you recognize it instantly. When emotional blackmail is used to gain compliance, you see it for exactly what it is. When someone tries to isolate you from other relationships or make you dependent on them for information or emotional support, your internal warning system activates immediately. What makes this recognition psychologically advanced is that you don't just notice these tactics, you understand their purpose, and you respond with clarity rather than emotional reaction. Jung observed that most people fall into manipulation because they are unaware of the psychological dynamics involved. They respond emotionally without recognizing the behavior as a tactic, which pulls them into the manipulator's influence without realizing it. Your awareness changes that process. When you detect a guilt tactic, you don't feel guilty, you feel informed about the other person's behavior. When you recognize emotional blackmail, you don't feel pressured, you understand their emotional immaturity. This instant awareness is not only protective, it is deeply threatening to narcissists because it prevents them from slowly drawing you into their control. Most manipulation relies on what Jung described as psychological erosion, the gradual weakening of someone's boundaries over time. Skilled manipulators know that if they can convince someone to accept small violations, they can slowly increase the pressure until full control is achieved. It's like slowly raising the temperature of water in a pot. The frog doesn't realize what's happening until it's too late. Your mind, however, does not allow this slow erosion. You identify manipulation at the earliest stage, forcing the narcissist to reveal their intentions much sooner than planned. Nothing frightens a manipulator more than having their methods exposed before they can take effect. Jung found that people with this level of awareness possess what he called tactical intelligence, the ability to see through social and emotional strategies designed to exploit or control others for personal benefit. What makes this especially unsettling to narcissists that they cannot play the long game with you. They cannot invest time in slowly breaking down your defenses because you recognize their tactics immediately and respond in ways that protect your psychological health. This leaves them with only two options: abandon manipulation entirely, which they find nearly impossible, or reveal their true nature far earlier than intended, exposing themselves to consequences they are not ready to face. Sign 6. You stay calm during chaos and refuse to engage in psychological drama. Jung said that within all chaos there is an underlying order. What makes your mind truly formidable and what terrifies narcissists the most is that you don't just understand this idea intellectually. You live it. When others become overwhelmed, when drama escalates, and when emotional instability spreads, you remain grounded, composed, and psychologically steady. This trait creates more fear in narcissists than any other, and here is why. Narcissists intentionally create chaos. This behavior is not accidental or unconscious, it is a deliberate strategy. They depend on drama, confusion, emotional volatility, and instability because these conditions allow them to shape narratives, influence reactions, and cast themselves as either the victim or the hero, depending on what benefits them most. Jung observed that chaos produces psychological vulnerability. When people are emotionally unsettled, their usual defenses weaken, making them far easier to manipulate and control. But when you stay calm in their carefully created chaos, you disrupt their entire strategy. You refuse to take part in their psychological performance. You don't react to the bait. You don't escalate the situation. You don't provide the emotional response they rely on to sustain their manipulative agenda. Carl Jung described this as psychological sovereignty, the ability to maintain your inner state of awareness regardless of outside pressure or emotional manipulation. There is also something even more powerful taking place when you remain composed in chaos. Your calm presence exposes the narcissist as the true source of the disorder. Consider the dynamic closely. When others become upset, react emotionally, and lose their balance, yet you remain steady and grounded, it becomes clear who is actually creating the disturbance. Your composure acts as a psychological mirror, reflecting the narcissist's dysfunction for everyone to observe. The chaos no longer appears accidental. It becomes evident that it is being deliberately generated by someone who benefits from instability. According to Carl Jung, your task is not to search for love, but to identify and remove the barriers within yourself that block it. Narcissists, however, build their identity around creating barriers to real connection, to authentic intimacy, and to genuine understanding. Your steady presence during conflict reveals these barriers as artificial structures designed to maintain control. At a deeper level, your calmness unsettles narcissists because it reflects a level of inner peace and psychological growth they cannot comprehend. They exist in constant internal turmoil, ongoing emotional volatility, and mental instability. They assume this is normal for everyone. When they meet someone who has achieved true inner balance, emotional regulation, and psychological stability, it highlights what they lack. It exposes the emptiness within their internal world. Your calm state becomes living evidence that there is another way to live and respond to life's challenges. This realization creates what Jung referred to as developmental panic, the fear that emerges when someone recognizes how far behind they are in their psychological development. Sign 7. You establish and maintain firm boundaries with complete consistency. Through his clinical work, Carl Jung observed that understanding your own darkness is one of the most effective ways to manage the darkness in others. Knowing your psychological landscape, your strengths, vulnerabilities, needs, and limits, means recognizing where your boundaries must be and having the strength to uphold them consistently. You do not enforce boundaries only when it feels convenient or when you feel strong. You maintain them regardless of pressure, manipulation, or emotional coercion. When you say no, it is final. When you set a limit, you uphold it without exception. If someone crosses a line, you address it clearly and immediately. This level of consistency frustrates narcissists because they are accustomed to gradually wearing people down. They look for weaknesses in others' boundaries and slowly exploit them until those limits lose meaning. Carl Jung noted that many individuals establish boundaries but fail to maintain them because they lack the resilience to endure the discomfort that follows when someone resists those limits. They give in to avoid conflict, preserve harmony, or prevent emotional outbursts. Your boundaries, however, are not flexible suggestions. They are clear lines grounded in your values, self-respect, and understanding of what protects your psychological well-being. Jung referred to this as psychological integrity, the alignment between your inner principles and outward behavior. When narcissists encounter boundaries they cannot cross, manipulate, or erode, they often respond with what Jung described as boundary rage. Intense anger triggered when their attempts at control are blocked. They may attempt guilt. You're being unreasonable. They may shift to emotional pressure. You're hurting me with this boundary. They may argue logically. This situation is different. Or they may escalate tension, increasing pressure in hopes that you will give in. But your awareness recognizes these reactions as confirmation that your boundaries are necessary and effective. The strength of their response reveals their intentions and the level of respect they have for your autonomy. Jung observed that psychologically healthy individuals understand that respecting boundaries means respecting the person. When someone repeatedly violates your limits, they demonstrate a lack of respect for your independence. What unsettles narcissists most is that your consistent boundaries force them to confront their own lack of self-control and disregard for others. Your firmness becomes a mirror reflecting their entitlement and inability to regulate themselves when faced with reasonable limits. It also demonstrates something they struggle to understand: the ability to prioritize your well-being without guilt. They see someone who values their own psychological space, and this self-respect triggers deeper shame beneath their grandiose exterior. Sign 8. You refuse to engage in psychological games and power struggles. Carl Jung stated that one of the most damaging phrases is, "We've always done it this way." Similarly, engaging in repetitive psychological games and unnecessary power struggles traps people in unhealthy patterns that serve no constructive purpose. These dynamics drain energy without producing growth. Your thinking has evolved beyond the need to participate in such games. When someone tries to provoke you over trivial matters, you do not respond. When someone attempts to provoke jealousy to gain attention, you remain unaffected. When someone creates competition where none is needed, you decline to participate. This response is not avoidance or weakness. It represents psychological maturity. You have developed what Jung described as psychological transcendence, the capacity to rise above unproductive conflict and focus on what truly matters. You are not avoiding conflict out of fear. You recognize that engaging would waste valuable emotional and mental energy better directed toward growth and meaningful relationships. Jung also noted that what suits one person may not suit another. There is no universal formula for living. Your refusal to engage in manipulative dynamics reflects your commitment to living according to your values, rather than allowing others to dictate how you expend your psychological resources. This non-participation deeply unsettles narcissists because their interaction style depends on others playing their games. Their drama requires participants. Their power struggles require opponents. Their psychological theater depends on audience involvement. Without engagement, the structure collapses. You see these games for what they are: manufactured conflicts designed to create drama, assert dominance, or distract from deeper issues. Jung observed that such surface-level conflicts often serve as avoidance mechanisms. People generate minor disputes to avoid confronting authentic emotions and genuine needs. By refusing to participate, you communicate a clear message. You are open to honest conversations about real concerns, but you will not invest in artificial disputes that undermine well-being. This position places narcissists in a difficult situation. They must either engage with authenticity, which requires vulnerability they fear, or seek others who will participate in their patterns, losing access to your energy and attention. Your non-engagement also reflects something they struggle to grasp: security within yourself that does not depend on winning arguments, proving superiority, or asserting dominance. Now, after examining these 8 signs, it is important to understand what occurs at a deeper psychological level when narcissists encounter genuine emotional strength. Carl Jung identified what he called psychological inflation, an exaggerated ego that relies on constant external validation to survive. Their grandiose identity resembles a structure that must be continually reinforced from outside sources. When they meet someone who embodies authentic self-knowledge, emotional maturity, and stable psychological strength, it triggers what Jung described as narcissistic collapse anxiety. They recognize that their inflated self-image is fragile when compared to your grounded confidence. Your strength does not simply resist manipulation. It exposes the emptiness behind their facade. You represent qualities they claim to possess, but do not truly embody authentic confidence, genuine self-worth, emotional stability, and psychological integrity. Jung explained that when 2 personalities meet, both are typically transformed. Yet when narcissists encounter authentic strength, they are the ones affected, and not positively. They are forced to confront their own psychological deficiency. This creates what Jung referred to as mirror terror, the fear that arises when someone sees their true self reflected against genuine strength. Your presence becomes a mirror revealing what they lack, what they have pretended to possess, and what they have tried to convince others they embody. At an even deeper level, Jung observed that narcissists are often unconsciously aware of their own internal emptiness. They understand, at some level, that their grand image of themselves is not real. They know their confidence is forced, their sense of superiority is an act, and their control is largely an illusion. Most of the time, they silence this awareness by staying around people who confirm their false identity or who lack the psychological insight to see through the mask. But when they meet someone with true inner strength, that buried awareness rises to the surface. This creates what Carl Jung described as truth terror, the fear of confronting reality about oneself. Here lies the deeper paradox Jung pointed out about building genuine psychological strength. The stronger your mind becomes, the more you attract individuals who feel compelled to challenge it. It is as though your growth sends out a signal, drawing both those who respect authentic strength and those who feel driven to test or overpower it. For this reason, developing a strong mind is not only about creating psychological boundaries. It also involves understanding and managing the complex dynamics your strength generates in relationships and social environments. As Carl Jung stated, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. A strong mind makes you aware of psychological shadows in others, often before they recognize them in themselves. You begin to notice manipulative behaviors, emotional immaturity, and defensive patterns, even when those displaying them remain unaware. This awareness brings both influence and responsibility. You gain the ability to protect yourself from manipulation, but you also carry the obligation to apply this understanding carefully and with empathy. Jung observed that individuals with authentic psychological strength frequently encounter what he called the hermit's dilemma. They learn to see through social masks and psychological strategies, which can make forming genuine connections more difficult with those still acting from unconscious patterns. Yet this same challenge opens the door to meaningful leadership and constructive influence. Your inner strength can serve as guidance for those striving to develop authenticity and emotional maturity. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." However, when you embody these 8 signs of psychological strength, you realize you do not need to be reshaped by every interaction. You can stay grounded in who you are while others respond to your authenticity. This does not suggest rigidity or resistance to growth. Instead, it means you evolve from stability rather than insecurity, from conscious intention rather than automatic reaction, from thoughtful understanding rather than fear-driven choices. Living at this level of psychological strength reflects what Jung referred to as the unmoved mover, someone who shapes situations and relationships through presence and authenticity instead of pressure or control. With this strength, compassion becomes natural because you are no longer threatened by the psychological struggles of others. You can observe their patterns with clarity and patience without being drawn into unhealthy dynamics. According to Carl Jung, your task is not to search for love, but to identify and remove the barriers within yourself that block it. When you cultivate genuine psychological strength, many of those internal barriers dissolve. This allows you to form real connections without losing your identity in the process. If you see yourself reflected in these 8 signs, recognize that you have reached an important stage in human psychological growth. You have moved toward what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who others expect you to be or who society pressures you to become. Yet this realization carries responsibility. A strong mind is not only protection against manipulation, it is also a signal for those still seeking their own authenticity. Jung found that psychologically strong individuals often become what he described as wounded healers, people who have faced their own inner struggles and can therefore guide others toward emotional maturity and self-awareness. Your presence serves a purpose beyond personal well-being. You represent what is possible when someone commits to true psychological development. You demonstrate that living from authentic strength is achievable without relying on artificial self-inflation. As Carl Jung expressed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. If you recognize these 8 signs within yourself, you are not only embracing that privilege, you are setting an example for others who are still discovering their path. Thank you for staying with me throughout this exploration. If you found today's discussion meaningful, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who may benefit from it. And if you would like to further support this work, you can leave a super thanks below. It is a simple way to show appreciation, and it genuinely helps sustain this channel.